Hey next door app neighbors, it's Mario here again. I see a lot of posts on the app from people asking questions about security cameras, and there's a lot of recommendations people give as well. I do as well, but I think it's important that when you're shopping for this kind of thing that you understand what it is that you're buying and what a difference certain specifications make in the quality of what you're trying to see and what you're trying to record. It can become very daunting if you're not familiar with it. So I'm going to walk you through some of the basics, so by the time you're done you have a really good understanding of what it is you're trying to buy and whether that particular camera is good for you or not, because believe me, not every camera is going to work properly in your situation. Let's have a look. So for me, the single most important thing when I'm buying a camera is to look at the resolution. And you'll see numbers on the internet when you're buying them from Amazon. They'll say 720, 1080, 2 megapixel, 4K, 5K, 8K. That all means something. What that means is whatever the camera sees, it's how much detail it captures. And that becomes really important when you go to zoom in on something, whether it be a face, a license plate, or any other detail. And I'm going to show you just how different that can be.
So we're looking at a 720, a 1080, a 5 megapixel, and a 4K camera. On the 720, you can't read the license plate. On a 1080, you could just barely make out some numbers. If we look at the 5 megapixel camera, it really becomes clear at this point as we zoom in. And of course on the 4K, we're going to get a result that's fantastic. We can read it clear as day. And this is about 50 feet away.
One of the other things that you see in the listing for each camera is the degree or angle of view. And what that means to you is how much of an area does the camera see at any given time. So I'll give you an example. If you put your hands up to the side of your face and you look straight ahead, your field of view, your angle of view is basically in between your hands. But as you slowly start to spread those apart, your field of view opens up. It's much like a camera. Now you would think having a complete open field of view, the largest angle possible, it would be the best solution, but it isn't. When you go to zoom in on something, you're going to see that it makes a drastic difference. So what we want to do is ideally, we want to have something that's in about the mid-range, that we can capture what we need to capture without getting too wide of a field, because when we zoom in, that's going to become a problem.
So now we're looking at a few different views of angle. The top two are about 110, 125. And they're a 5 megapixel camera, 4K. The bottom left one here, it's more of a, well, it's a wider view. It's about 180 degrees and it's a 12 megapixel camera. And there's a 360 12 megapixel camera. Now you can see a lot more to a certain degree in the 360 because it does give you more of a rounding effect and it covers more area. The problem comes into play is when we take these cameras and once again we zoom. So a 5 megapixel camera, we get a good view of the license plate, the 4K, the same thing, fantastic view. But watch what happens when we look at the 180 angle. All of a sudden it starts to get distorted. Why? Because it can't concentrate the pixels into a certain area to be able to be clear because it's so wide. And the 360 is a complete disaster. As we try to zoom in on that, you're going to see that it doesn't even look like a license plate. It just basically looks like a blob. And this is all because our view of angle is too great. So we want to stay to a narrower view.
So one of the many features on cameras these days is night vision, and it's a handy thing to have. However, night vision has its setbacks. Typically, night vision only shows you a very heavy grayscale, which means colors don't show up and details don't show up. So when you look at any night vision, you'll often see that somebody's wearing what appears to be completely white or washed out, and you can't really make out any detail. Now the way to get around that is to look at a camera that has a spotlight built into it, so that when it senses motion, not only does it record, it also turns on a light that's on board on the camera, because the moment you add light to night vision, everything becomes color and the detail is much clearer, and I'm going to show that to you now.
Here's where the night vision doesn't really do well. You can see there's no color, there's no distinguishing features. It's really hard to describe. When my spotlight comes on my camera, all of a sudden we have color, we have a little more definition, easier to give a description.
Most of the cameras out there have two-way audio, and what that allows you to do, it allows you to talk to who's ever in front of the camera, hear what they have to say, and respond. So it's a handy feature. You can ask who it is, what they want. If the camera doesn't have that, I don't know if I necessarily want the camera. I mean, to me, it's a feature that is invaluable. Plus, you can warn people off. If they hear the camera talking, they definitely know that you're there, and it's another reason for them to leave if they shouldn't be there in the first place. So when we're talking about a Wi-Fi camera, we're talking about cameras that for the most part run on the 2.4 gigahertz band. There are some 5G cameras out there, but here's the problem. A 2.4G signal travels much farther than a 5 gigahertz signal. And that's going to be an issue, especially if you've got cameras in the backyard or somewhere that is farther away from your router. So for the most part, I would stay with a 2.4G Wi-Fi camera. One of the most popular cameras right now is a doorbell style camera, and they're available from a couple of different manufacturers, and they're wildly popular. Now, I have a bit of a problem with that. Anytime a camera is mounted at a height that it can be reached, you are susceptible to having that camera disabled, or somebody getting around and defeating the purpose of that camera, which is to record any activities that might be happening. So quite simply, if it's mounted at a height that somebody can reach and it's a doorbell camera, all you need is a black piece of tape. And if I'm wearing a hoodie and a mask like is common these days, I'm going to basically reach in there and I'm going to disable the camera altogether. It's not my first choice when it comes to cameras. I think you can mount a camera in a different location on your home other than a doorbell camera and still receive the same results. You typically want to see who's approaching your door. And that's the important part. Again, if it's mounted low, somebody can disable that camera. If it's mounted higher up and still pointed in the same direction, you can see that individual coming up your walk, coming up your driveway, and recording everything you need to record. And you have the added benefit of them not being able to take that camera and disabling it is really what it comes down to. So there's one last thing I want to talk to you about, and that is, where is your video stored that you're recording? And this is really important. The majority of cameras that are out there, they take that video that they scan off of that camera and they send it over the internet. It leaves your house and goes to a server. Could be in the US, could be in China. You really don't know where it goes. And it's an issue in a couple of different ways. The biggest issue I see is if you don't have local storage, which means you don't store your video on your camera or in your house. The moment the internet goes down, your camera is completely useless because it's not recording anything. It's just sitting there doing nothing. And we don't know what happens in life. If the power goes out to your provider or to the server on the other end, even though you may have power at home, you may not have internet, and that's a big deal. So that means there are opportunities for people to do damage to your home, and you won't catch any of this on camera. So the solution is look for a camera that has a recording card, an SD card on board. Why? It'll do two things. It'll continue to send it to the internet, but it has a backup on board, which you can access through an app, and basically have it sitting there ready to use when you need it. The other side of the coin is it's also better quality, because in order to send it over the internet, they have to compress it, which reduces the quality of the video, and send it back to you, which does take some time to retrieve. So whenever possible, look for a camera that has an SD card on board, or if you have a digital video recorder in your camera system, then make use of that. It's great to have as a backup. I wouldn't rely on it exclusively, but definitely the one thing you don't want to do is rely on one single method of storing your video, and that is the internet. So I'm going to show you a quick drawing here on how that gets transported from your camera to the server and back to you again. It's a horrible drawing, I get it, but I think you'll get the concept. So you've got your camera up and running, and I think it's required that you know where your video goes and possibly who sees it. So let's take a moment here to say that this is your camera, okay? The camera is now picking up whatever it sees. The signal from that camera basically travels out to the internet. And somewhere on that internet is a server. That server is going to send what it sees and store your video on back to you. And you in turn can watch your video. What happens is your camera can continue to function and your internet can get cut off, at which point you will never see any recordings and you will never see it on your app. And that's a problem. Why is that a problem? Because your camera at this point is useless. The only thing it can do is look. It can't send the data that it sees anywhere. So a better solution would be to have your camera, see what's out there, let it send it to the internet, let it send it back to you. Step one. Step two, have your camera send it to either an SD card or a recorder in your house. Why is this important? Because if you lose your internet connection, again, you get no video, you don't see what happened in your home. If it records to an SD card that is on the camera or a recording box in your house, you have your video regardless of what happens with the internet connection. It's the safest way to go. And well, that's it. Hopefully you've gotten a little bit more information that you can make an intelligent choice when you go out to buy the camera that you want to buy. Keep in mind, the utmost importance in my mind is resolution. You need to see what it is you're recording at a very high detail. You don't have to go to a high-end camera. You don't have to go to 8K and 4K, that type of thing. I went with a 2K camera, which is 3 megapixels, and I find for what I do with it, it has plenty of clarity and plenty of zoom. And to tell you the truth, the camera cost me $80. So if you want to send me a message and ask me what that might be, I'll certainly send you a link so you can have a look at it yourself. You know, the lower end cameras are all 1080p, and again, if you zoom, you're going to lose a lot of qualities. You may go to the 4K or the 8K cameras, but be aware, they take up a lot of bandwidth and they are awful slow to transmit on the internet, and they're awful slow to transmit over your Wi-Fi unless you have some really high-end Wi-Fi going. So I hope you learned a lot, and if you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out on the app and I'll do my best to help you. Take care.